In the depths of our existence, amidst the chaos and turmoil of our daily struggles, we often find ourselves consumed by the flames of burnout. It's a relentless force, creeping into every corner of our minds, sapping our strength, and leaving us feeling utterly depleted. But fear not, for in the ancient wisdom of Stoicism lies a beacon of hope, a guiding light that can illuminate our path and lead us out of the darkness. Stoicism, born in the crucible of ancient Greece and nurtured by the minds of titans like Zeno of Citium, Epictetus, and Marcus Aurelius, is more than just a philosophy, it's a way of life. It teaches us not to shy away from adversity, but to embrace it wholeheartedly. It shows us that true strength lies not in the absence of suffering, but in our ability to endure it with grace and dignity. The path to burnout, our understanding the enemy. Before we embark on our journey to overcome burnout, it is imperative that we first understand its nature. Burnout is not merely physical exhaustion or mental fatigue, it is a state of utter despair, a soul-crushing burden that weighs heavily upon our shoulders. It manifests in the form of apathy, cynicism, and a profound sense of disillusionment with the world around us. In our modern society, where success is measured by material wealth and external validation, it's all too easy to fall into the trap of constant striving. We chase after fleeting pleasures and ephemeral accolades, believing them to be the key to our happiness. But the more we grasp, the further they slip from our grasp, until we find ourselves trapped in a never-ending cycle of desire and disappointment. The Stoic response, cultivating inner resilience. But fear not, for Stoicism offers us a way out of this endless cycle of suffering. At its core lies the concept of inner resilience, the ability to weather life's storms with steadfast resolve and unwavering equanimity. Stoicism teaches us that true happiness does not depend on external circumstances, but on the strength of our own character. One of the fundamental tenets of Stoicism is the notion of the dichotomy of control. According to this principle, there are certain things in life that are within our power to change, and others that are not. By focusing our energy on the things that lie within our control, our thoughts, our actions, and our attitudes, we can free ourselves from the tyranny of external circumstances. The practice of Stoicism, embracing virtue. Central to the Stoic philosophy is the concept of virtue, the idea that true happiness can only be attained through the cultivation of moral excellence. Stoicism identifies four cardinal virtues: wisdom, courage, justice, and temperance. By embodying these virtues in our daily lives, we can cultivate a sense of inner peace and fulfillment that transcends the fleeting pleasures of the material world. Wisdom, the first of the cardinal virtues, teaches us to see the world with clarity and discernment. It urges us to question our assumptions, to challenge our preconceptions, and to seek truth above all else. In the words of Epictetus, it is not events that disturb people, but their judgments about those events. By cultivating a wise and discerning mind, we can free ourselves from the grip of irrational fears and anxieties. Courage, the second of the cardinal virtues, calls upon us to face our fears with boldness and determination. It is not the absence of fear that defines courage, but the willingness to act in spite of it. As Marcus Aurelius famously said, the impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. By embracing our fears and confronting them head-on, we can unleash the full potential of our inner strength. Justice, the third of the cardinal virtues, implores us to treat others with fairness, kindness, and compassion. It reminds us that we are all interconnected, bound together by the bonds of humanity. In the words of Seneca, wherever there is a human being, there is an opportunity for kindness. By practicing justice in our interactions with others, we can foster a sense of unity and solidarity that transcends the boundaries of race, religion, and nationality. Temperance, the fourth and final cardinal virtue, teaches us to exercise moderation and self-restraint in all things. It urges us to resist the temptations of excess and indulgence, and to live in harmony with the natural order of the universe. As Epictetus famously said, no great thing is created suddenly, any more than a bunch of grapes or a figure. If you tell me that you desire a fig, I answer that there must be time. Let it first blossom, then bear fruit, then ripen. By practicing temperance in our daily lives, we can achieve a state of inner balance and harmony that is impervious to the vicissitudes of fortune. Integrating Stoicism into leadership. In our modern world, where the demands of leadership are greater than ever before, Stoicism offers us a timeless blueprint for effective and virtuous leadership. By embodying the principles of wisdom, courage, justice, and temperance, we can inspire others to greatness and lead by example. Wisdom, the first of the cardinal virtues, is perhaps the most essential quality of a great leader. It requires us to see the bigger picture, to anticipate challenges before they arise, and to make decisions with clarity and foresight. A wise leader is not swayed by the whims of public opinion or the allure of short-term gains, but remains steadfast in their commitment to the greater good. Courage, the second of the cardinal virtues, is the hallmark of true leadership. It requires us to take bold risks, to stand up for what is right, and to lead with integrity and conviction. A courageous leader is not afraid to speak truth to power, to challenge the status quo, and to blaze a trail where others fear to tread. Justice, the third of the cardinal virtues, lies at the heart of ethical leadership. It requires us to treat others with fairness, respect, and compassion, regardless of their status or position. A just leader is not swayed by personal biases or vested interests, but upholds the principles of equality and fairness for all. Temperance, the fourth and final cardinal virtue, is perhaps the most difficult quality for a leader to cultivate. It requires us to exercise self-restraint and moderation in all things, to resist the temptations of power and prestige, and to lead by example. A temperate leader is not driven by ego or ambition, but by a genuine desire to serve the greater good. In conclusion, Stoicism offers us a timeless roadmap for overcoming burnout and cultivating inner resilience. By embracing the principles of wisdom, courage, justice, and temperance, we can free ourselves from the grip of external circumstances and live a life of purpose and fulfillment. As Marcus Aurelius famously said, "Very little is needed to make a happy life, it is all within yourself, in your way of thinking." So let us heed the wisdom of the Stoics and embark on this journey together, towards a life of inner peace and serenity. In the labyrinth of modern existence, where stress and burnout lurk around every corner, Stoicism stands as a beacon of resilience and inner strength. Rooted in ancient philosophy and fortified by the wisdom of Stoic sages like Epictetus, Seneca, and Marcus Aurelius, this enduring philosophy offers profound insights into overcoming adversity and cultivating effective leadership in the face of burnout. Understanding burnout, our modern epidemic. Burnout, a term coined in the 1970s by psychologist Herbert Freudenberger, has since become an epidemic in the modern world. Defined as a state of emotional, physical, and mental exhaustion caused by prolonged stress and overwork, burnout can wreak havoc on our well-being, sapping our energy and leaving us feeling depleted and disillusioned. In today's fast-paced world, where success is often equated with productivity and achievement, burnout has become an all-too-common affliction. We push ourselves to the brink, sacrificing our health and happiness in pursuit of external validation and material gain. But as the Stoics teach us, true fulfillment cannot be found in the pursuit of fleeting pleasures or external accolades, it lies within the depths of our own character. Stoicism and resilience, a timeless philosophy for modern leaders. At the heart of Stoicism lies the concept of resilience, the ability to endure hardship with grace and dignity. Stoicism teaches us to cultivate inner strength and fortitude, to face life's challenges with courage and resilience, and to find meaning and purpose in the face of adversity. One of the central tenets of Stoicism is the dichotomy of control, the idea that there are certain things in life that are within our control, and others that are not. By focusing our energy on the things that lie within our control, our thoughts, our actions, and our attitudes, we can free ourselves from the grip of external circumstances and find a sense of inner peace and tranquility. Practicing Stoic leadership, wisdom, courage, justice, and temperance. Stoic leadership, rooted in the principles of wisdom, courage, justice, and temperance, offers a timeless blueprint for navigating the challenges of the modern world. Wisdom, the first of the cardinal virtues, calls upon us to cultivate a deep understanding of ourselves and the world around us. It requires us to see beyond the surface level of events and circumstances, to discern the underlying truths that govern our lives, and to make decisions with clarity and foresight. Courage, the second of the cardinal virtues, is the hallmark of true leadership. It requires us to face our fears head-on, to stand up for what is right, and to lead by example. A courageous leader is not swayed by external pressures or the fear of failure, but remains steadfast in their commitment to their principles and values. Justice, the third of the cardinal virtues, implores us to treat others with fairness, respect, and compassion. It requires us to uphold the principles of equality and justice for all, regardless of race, gender, or social status. A just leader is not driven by personal gain or self-interest, but by a genuine desire to create a more just and equitable world. Temperance, the fourth and final cardinal virtue, calls upon us to exercise moderation and self-restraint in all things. It requires us to resist the temptations of excess and indulgence, and to live in harmony with the natural order of the universe. A temperate leader leads by example, demonstrating humility and self-discipline in their actions and decisions. Integrating Stoicism into leadership, our path to fulfillment. In the fast-paced world of modern leadership, Stoicism offers a timeless roadmap for navigating the complexities of the human experience. By embracing the principles of wisdom, courage, justice, and temperance, we can cultivate inner resilience and lead with integrity and purpose. In the words of Marcus Aurelius, the happiness of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts. Let us heed the wisdom of the Stoics and embark on this journey together, towards a life of inner peace, resilience, and fulfillment. In the crucible of demanding work environments, where stress and burnout loom as constant threats, Stoicism offers a robust arsenal of strategies for combating exhaustion and fostering resilience. Drawing upon the timeless wisdom of Stoic philosophy, individuals can cultivate a mindset that not only withstands the rigors of professional life but thrives amidst adversity. Here's a detailed exploration of Stoic strategies for navigating demanding work environments. 1. Embrace the dichotomy of control. Stoicism teaches us to distinguish between what is within our control and what is not. In the workplace, there are often external factors, such as deadlines, office politics, or market fluctuations, that are beyond our influence. Focusing on these uncontrollable elements only breeds anxiety and frustration. Instead, Stoicism encourages us to channel our energy into aspects we can control, our efforts, attitudes, and responses to challenges. By accepting the limitations of our control, we free ourselves from the burden of undue stress and cultivate resilience. 2. Practice mindfulness and presence. Mindfulness, a cornerstone of Stoic practice, involves cultivating awareness of the present moment and accepting it without judgment. In the midst of a demanding workday, it's easy to become consumed by worries about the future or regrets about the past. However, Stoicism teaches us to anchor ourselves in the present, focusing our attention on the task at hand with unwavering concentration. By practicing mindfulness, we can foster a sense of calm amidst chaos and approach our work with clarity and intention. 3. Maintain perspective and rationality. In the face of workplace challenges, Stoicism encourages us to maintain a rational perspective and avoid succumbing to irrational emotions such as anger or despair. Rather than catastrophizing setbacks or dwelling on perceived injustices, Stoics strive to view situations objectively and respond with equanimity. By reframing difficulties as opportunities for growth and learning, we can navigate the ups and downs of professional life with resilience and composure. 4. Cultivate virtuous character traits. Stoicism emphasizes the cultivation of virtuous character traits, such as wisdom, courage, justice, and temperance, as essential components of a resilient mindset. In the workplace, these virtues manifest in various ways. Wisdom. Seeking to understand the underlying causes of challenges and making informed decisions based on reason and sound judgment. Courage. Facing difficult conversations, taking calculated risks, and speaking truth to power with conviction and integrity. Justice. Treating colleagues and subordinates with fairness, respect, and compassion, and advocating for equitable practices within the organization. Temperance. Exercising self-discipline and moderation in work habits, avoiding burnout by setting boundaries, and prioritizing self-care. 5. Practice negative visualization. Negative visualization, a Stoic contemplative practice, involves imagining worst-case scenarios and mentally preparing ourselves to cope with adversity. In the context of a demanding work environment, this technique can help mitigate the impact of unexpected challenges or setbacks. By mentally rehearsing our responses to potential obstacles, we inoculate ourselves against the shock and disappointment of unforeseen events, fostering resilience and adaptability. 6. Foster gratitude and contentment. Stoicism encourages us to cultivate gratitude for the blessings in our lives, even amidst the trials and tribulations of the workplace. By focusing on what we have rather than what we lack, we cultivate a sense of contentment and inner peace that transcends external circumstances. Practicing gratitude can help counteract the tendency to fixate on professional ambitions or material success, fostering resilience and well-being in the face of adversity. 7. Seek community and support. Finally, Stoicism emphasizes the importance of community and social support in cultivating resilience. In the workplace, fostering connections with colleagues, mentors, and peers can provide valuable sources of encouragement, advice, and camaraderie. By surrounding ourselves with like-minded individuals who share our values and goals, we create a support network that bolsters our resilience and fortitude in the face of professional challenges. In conclusion, Stoicism offers a rich tapestry of strategies for combating burnout and cultivating resilience in demanding work environments. By embracing the dichotomy of control, practicing mindfulness, maintaining perspective, cultivating virtuous character traits, engaging in negative visualization, fostering gratitude, and seeking community support, individuals can navigate the complexities of the modern workplace with grace and resilience. Dear viewers, in the hustle and bustle of our modern lives, where stress and burnout seem to lurk around every corner, it's easy to feel overwhelmed and depleted. But amidst the chaos, there lies a timeless philosophy that offers a beacon of hope, a path to resilience and inner peace that can help us weather life's storms with grace and fortitude. Stoicism, rooted in the wisdom of ancient philosophers like Seneca, Epictetus, and Marcus Aurelius, offers profound insights into navigating the challenges of our demanding work environments and cultivating a mindset of resilience and strength. At the heart of Stoicism lies the concept of the dichotomy of control, the idea that there are certain things in life that are within our control, and others that are not. By focusing our energy on the things we can change, our thoughts, our actions, and our attitudes, we can free ourselves from the burden of worry and anxiety, and find a sense of inner peace and tranquility. Stoicism also teaches us the importance of mindfulness and acceptance, the ability to be fully present in the moment, and to accept things as they are, without judgment or resistance. By cultivating mindfulness, we can approach our work with clarity and equanimity, finding meaning and purpose in even the most challenging circumstances. But perhaps the most powerful lesson Stoicism offers is the importance of cultivating virtue in action, the qualities of wisdom, courage, justice, and temperance that enable us to live with integrity and purpose. By embodying these virtues in our daily lives, we can cultivate a sense of inner resilience and strength that transcends the ups and downs of the external world. So to all of you who are feeling overwhelmed and exhausted by the demands of modern life, I urge you to take heart, to embrace the wisdom of the Stoics and embark on a journey of self-discovery and growth. By cultivating resilience and inner peace, we can navigate the challenges of our demanding work environments with grace and fortitude, finding fulfillment and purpose along the way. Remember, the path to resilience begins within. It begins with a willingness to embrace the present moment, to accept things as they are, and to cultivate the virtues that lie within each of us. So let us heed the wisdom of the Stoics and embark on this journey together, towards a life of inner peace, resilience, and fulfillment. And to all of you who found value and inspiration in this message, don't forget to show your support by liking this video and subscribing to our channel. By doing so, you'll stay updated with more insightful content aimed at helping you navigate life's challenges with resilience and inner peace. Thank you for being a part of Stoic Solace Society.